Hello, and welcome to Misterios Divinos podcast. Today, we're delving into one of the most compelling and tragic stories ever told, the story of Saul, the very first king of Israel. His is an epic tale, a story of a hero's incredible rise and a dramatic, mysterious fall that leaves us with questions about power, faith, and even how history itself gets written. And this is the heart of the mystery, isn't it? Saul wasn't just some politician who climbed his way to the top. He was chosen, anointed even. He seemed to have a divine seal of approval. He had absolutely everything going for him. So what went so terribly, terribly wrong? How does a man with a start like that end up in tragedy and madness? Well, let's unpack this mystery together. To really understand the fall, you first have to appreciate just how high he climbed. Saul's story doesn't begin with ambition or a thirst for power. It starts with destiny calling a humble, unsuspecting man to greatness. He was, by all accounts, the perfect person to unite a scattered and struggling people. When you look at the early Saul, he was the total package. The book of Samuel tells us he came from a good family, he was tall, handsome, he looked the part. But more importantly, he had character. He was humble, responsible, and he actually listened to advice. When he was told he was going to be king, his first reaction wasn't pride. It was disbelief. This was a good man, not some power-hungry wannabe. And boy, did he prove his worth, and fast. When a threat emerged, the Ammonites threatening the city of Jabesh, Saul didn't hesitate. He rallied the tribes of Israel and led them to this incredible, decisive victory. And this wasn't just another battle. This was the moment he became a true king in the eyes of the people. He was their protector, their unifier. And this is so crucial to understand. His rule started with a clear divine mission. This wasn't his personal project. His whole purpose was to save his people, a job literally given to him by God. In the beginning, he was the perfect instrument for a divine plan. But then, the story takes a very dark turn. Somewhere along this path, the hero started to lose his way. So now, let's look at the critical mistakes, the decisions that would ultimately seal his fate. Okay, so here we see the two moments where everything changed. On the left, you have God's commands delivered through the prophet Samuel. They're direct, they're absolute. And on the right, you have what Saul actually did. He felt the pressure from his army. He was scared they'd leave, so he took a holy ritual into his own hands. Then, he's given a command for total destruction, and he makes a practical choice, but it's a disobedient one. He starts to bend the rules. And you've got to understand these weren't just simple mistakes. They show a huge shift happening inside the man himself. His focus moved from, okay, what does God want me to do, to, what do I need to do to stay in control and look good to my people? His motivation wasn't about service anymore. It was about self-preservation. And if you need any more proof, here it is. The final nail in the coffin. After that campaign against the Amalekites, what does he do? He builds a monument to himself. The humble farmer we met at the beginning, he's long gone. He's been replaced by a king who is desperate for personal glory. This is the turning point, and it feels like there's no coming back from it. The consequences of this change were, well, they were catastrophic for Saul and for the entire kingdom. But as we dig into his downward spiral, a fascinating new question starts to surface. Is the story we've been told the whole truth, or is there maybe another layer to this mystery? According to the biblical story, the punishment was swift and it was severe. That divine favor that had guided him was just gone. The text says he was afflicted by a harmful spirit, which sounds a lot like what we might call severe depression and paranoia. And this torment took shape as an obsessive, violent jealousy of the new hero on the scene, David, who he started to see as a direct threat to his throne. Okay, this is where things get really interesting. The religious explanation is pretty clear. Saul disobeyed God, and so he was punished. End of story. But what if there's more to it? What if we start looking at this story not just as holy scripture, but as a historical document, maybe one written with a very specific agenda? A lot of modern historians and scholars point out that these ancient texts weren't written like a modern biography. They were compiled over generations, edited, and put together. In fact, Saul's rejection by God is told twice in 2 different chapters, which suggests that different sources were being woven together. And crucially, these texts were likely edited during the time of King David's descendants, which raises a huge question. Was Saul's story shaped to make David look better, to legitimize a new dynasty by trashing the reputation of the first king? This academic insight really highlights how complex this all is. For instance, scholars can identify specific groups of writers, like the Deuteronomists, who wrote long after any of this happened. And their writing style and their theology suggests they edited parts of the story with their own goals in mind. Now, this doesn't mean it didn't happen, but it does mean the way the story is told might have served a political purpose. Saul's failure becomes the perfect justification for David to take over. So, with these two competing ideas in mind, the story of divine judgment on one hand and the story of political history on the other, let's look at how Saul's story ends and the powerful, complicated legacy he left behind. His end was just as dramatic as his beginning. On the slopes of Mount Gilboa, facing a crushing defeat against his old enemies, the Philistines, with his own sons dead around him, a wounded Saul chose to fall on his own sword rather than be captured and humiliated, a truly tragic end for Israel's first king. When you lay it all out like this, you can really see the whole arc of the tragedy, can't you? It's a clear trajectory, from this humble, promising start to a celebrated hero to a disobedient ruler who then descends into paranoia and finally meets this terrible, tragic death. It's a complete epic all in one life. And so we're left with two very powerful, very different ways of looking at King Saul. On the one hand, from a theological view, his life is this timeless cautionary tale about pride and what happens when a leader turns their back on God. But from a historical view, he might have been a capable, if flawed, founding king whose reputation became a casualty of history, a history written by the people who supported the man who replaced him. Ultimately, the mystery of King Saul forced us to ask a much bigger question, one that echoes through all of time. Is history what actually happened, or is it just the story that the winners get to tell? So what do you think? Was Saul a tragic hero who made mistakes, or a victim of a political smear campaign? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you liked the video, subscribe, leave a like, comment on what you liked most, and share the video. Thanks for joining me.